During the week, we saw more shocking examples of hatred, that's how I can only describe them, against Australia's Jewish community. Now, on Wednesdays, some real special human beings, I just don't want to say what I really want to say, who I think are still on the run, went on a vandalism spree in Sydney's East, which is home to many Jewish Australians. A car was set on fire. Cars were spray painted. The disgusting phrase "F Israel," amongst others. And as someone who knows that area pretty well, I grew up there, it's sickening to me. And I can imagine how Australian Jews are feeling, knowing that's in many of the suburbs in which they live. But given what's happened lately, it's not surprising. And to actually say that aloud is somewhat sobering. Statistics revealed in Parliament showed there were a total of 425 anti-Semitic incidents reported to police in the year ending July. 425. That is triple the amount of the year before. Triple. Now, Premier Chris Minns has promised in New South Wales to do better, but sadly, we haven't seen, I think, those sort of genuine promises from his federal colleagues. Now, the Israeli government expressed outrage this week, as in my view they should have, at Tony Burke's decision to deny a visa to Israel's former Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked, and Penny Wong has refused to condemn the decision by the International Criminal Court to issue an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu. This is despite key allies in the US and a couple of former Australian Prime Ministers criticising the court's decision. As I said yesterday, I want to talk more about this, and I will do that now with Dr David Adler, President of the Australian Jewish Association, who joins me on the line. David, nice to talk to you. I hope you're well.
Thank you, Luke. Always good to join you, but what a dreadful subject.
It is a dreadful subject, you're right. You described the acts of these vandals in Sydney as domestic terrorism, and I understand why you would say that, and that's a threshold that's difficult to meet. But these are acts of hatred aimed at one section of our society. So I guess it meets the threshold, doesn't it?
Well, the common definition of terrorism, I'll just quote you, it's short: the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. So that violence could be directed against people, or it could be directed against property. In this case, it's clearly unlawful to go around vandalising cars, burning cars, writing threatening slogans on a couple of buildings in the area as well. Mm. It's clearly designed for intimidation. The area in which it was done, as you know, and as you've said, is well known as a focus for the Jewish community in New South Wales. It's between two major Jewish community facilities, a hospital and a synagogue. It is directed against civilians. It's not a military target. And the motivation is very likely political. F Israel is clearly a political slogan. So it meets the general criteria of domestic terrorism. And I think our political leaders and our law enforcement do us a disservice in not calling it out exactly for what it is.
Yeah. I just wanted, David, if you can help me understand this. I see people say, you can hate Israel without being anti-Semitic. And I think to myself, yeah, you would say that as a way to excuse your anti-Semitism. Have I got that wrong?
Well, there are experts that have defined the lines between criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism. And you can criticise any country for its policies, for the actions of its government, and Israel is no exception. If you disagree with what a government is doing and you say so, that is not anti-Semitism in the case of Israel. But if your criticism and your actions go beyond that of any other country on the planet, if you start to use the sort of tropes that we've seen on the streets of Sydney that are reminiscent of the Holocaust, if you start to support prescribed terrorist activities, terrorist organisations over the democratic state of Israel, then you have crossed the line.
Yeah.
There is only one Jewish state in the entire world. Jewish identity and the practice of Judaism is intermingled with the land of Israel since biblical times. There are certain Jewish practices that can only be undertaken in the land of Israel. And look, anti-Semitism morphs. Its focus changes. And look, it's a whole long subject, but very briefly, we saw during the Inquisition, it was a hatred of the Jewish religion with forced conversions. During some of the totalitarian regimes, such as the former Soviet Union, there was a hatred of the Jewish culture and suppression of Jewish practice. The Nazis, of course, took a racial approach and wanted to eliminate the Jewish people as a race, and now it's morphed to hatred of the Jewish state. So very, very often, Luke, it does cross the line into anti-Semitism for sure.
Yeah. Now, the Premier met with leaders of the Jewish community on Friday. I'm not sure, David, I should have asked if you were involved. Do you have confidence in politicians being able to and really having a desire to deal with this?
Look, unfortunately, we've seen a complete disconnect between their words and their action. Chris Minns will say nice things, and even Anthony Albanese, who we have criticised a lot because of the federal Labor government's policies, he will say that there's no place for anti-Semitism in Australia. If you ask, almost universally the leaders will say words like that. But then you look at what's happening on the ground and you say, okay, there's no place for anti-Semitism except on the streets of Sydney, and except on the streets of Melbourne, and except on the grounds of the university, and except in the lecture theatres, and except if people carry pictures and slogans supporting terrorist organisations whose objective is the murder of Jews, except if you're an Islamic hate preacher in some of the mosques, etc., etc. Since the 9th of October, when we saw those awful, violent, anti-Semitic riots in front of the Opera House, this has been out of control. And our leadership and our law enforcement gets a big F. It's outrageous.
Yeah. Does the decision to deny Aylid Shaked, I hope I've said that lady's name correct, a visa to Australia, why does that cause you concern? Why would Tony Burke do that?
It's a completely bizarre decision. She was in Australia about 2.5 years ago, and she's a popular speaker. She's a former Minister for Justice in the Israeli government, and by the way, she sat in a broad coalition which included some Arab members of the Knesset. She is regarded as right-wing, but willing to work with Arab colleagues in the Knesset. It's a stain on Australia that a person of that standing would be denied entry. She does have some firm views about the local politics and about dealing with terrorists and terrorist organisations in the Middle East. That's fine, but she never advocates violence against any particular people. The only thing we can think of, Luke, is that, as you know, we have an election within 6 months. And the federal government has more and more and more taken a stand against Israel and against the Jewish community, frankly. And there are a lot of people who think that this is about trying to secure certain seats in southwest Sydney.
Yeah.
We know that the Muslim vote outnumbers the Jewish vote by about 8 or 9 to 1.
Yeah.
And it could be grubby domestic politics which is driving this, but it's an absolute disgrace. I used to live in a wonderful country called Australia. You might remember it.
Yeah, only vaguely. You either stand for, you either have principles and things you stand for, and then, because you believe in them and they're long-held views, and you express them, or you go outside and you just you wet your end of your finger. And you say, now, where's the wind blowing here? Now, I'll make my opinions align with that. I'm going to run out of time, David. I have to ask you about Benjamin Netanyahu. Is he a war criminal?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. People forget, and it's amazing they forget, that Israel is battling for its existence on 7 fronts against terrorist organisations. There was a ceasefire on the 7th of October. It was broken by Hamas breaking through the border and murdering, raping, beheading, kidnapping people. It is a very complex and difficult war that Israel has embarked upon, because a significant proportion of it is underground in tunnels and in dense urban areas. But Israel has gone to extraordinary lengths, perhaps more than any other country, to minimise civilian deaths. Hamas, on the other hand, is doing everything it can to maximise civilian deaths, using people as human shields, etc. There are still there's still 101 hostages unaccounted for in Gaza, and no country can stand by and do nothing when its citizens are treated like this. It is absolutely a battle of self-defence. Israel did not ask for it, and frankly, it could end tomorrow. It could end tomorrow if the terrorists released the hostages and laid down their arms, and then the rebuilding process would commence. But they're so ideological, extremist in their worldview that they would prefer the death of many people and to damage Israel internationally than to actually cease the conflict, which they could do very quickly.
I have great respect for you, David Adler. I appreciate your time as a very sensible voice on all these matters. I'm sorry that your community, part of our community, has to deal with this, and hopefully at some point leadership will become something that resembles leadership in the country you and I would have called Australia. Stay well.
100%. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Dr. David Adler.